Yes. My name is George A. Filer the third. I don't normally use the third. But I was in the U.S. Air Force, and my final rank was major. What else you'd like to know?
Well,
Have an MBA, and was a former vice president of MedCorps. In other words, I've done other things since leaving the Air Force.
and if you can give the years that you were in the military.
I was in from 1958 to 1978. 20 years, yes. Then I
And
retired.
your rank when you retired was?
Major.
Major. And can you just sort of give an overview of what positions you held in latter years?
Well, I flew as a navigator in various aircraft, tanker and transport aircraft. Flew last in C-141s at McGuire Air Force Base. I was also an intelligence officer most of my career as my desk job, so to speak. And I, in that period, frequently, briefed generals and congressmen on our capabilities and the threat to our forces.
And if you can, tell us about the event that happened at Fort Dix and McGuire Air Force Base, and just tell the story from the beginning of how you learned about it and what you've learned since about that event.
Well, I was normally, like I mentioned, a briefing officer, and I would come to work 4 o'clock or so in the morning. And on the morning of January 18th, 1978, I drove through the main gate at McGuire, and I noticed that there was red lights out on the runway, and that probably something was going on out on the runways there because of all the red lights and like police cars and fire trucks and so on. And didn't think too much about it until I got to 21st Air Force Command Post, is where I worked, and I would go in there and prepare a briefing for
What was
the
your position there?
generals. I was a deputy director of intelligence for 21st Air Force, which controlled half the military aircraft and flew the presidents and various VIPs and from the Mississippi River around to India. We had some 300 aircraft, and we were flying all kinds of missions, submarine crews, almost anything that had to do with the military airlift we accomplished. And this particular morning when I went into the command post, I was met by the head of the command post, and he said it's been a very exciting evening, that we've had UFOs in the, over the McGuire all night, and that one had apparently landed or possibly crashed at Fort Dix, and that when a military policeman came upon the alien, that he had pulled out a gun and shot them. And I said, a foreigner, an alien? I was a little bit confused by him saying alien. He says, no, an alien from outer space. He was very specific about the fact that an alien from outer space had been shot at Fort Dix, and that it had run away after being wounded and headed for McGuire. Now, McGuire and Fort Dix just have a fence between them, and this alien supposedly climbed the fence or went under it or whatever and got to McGuire and died out on the end of the runway. And the security police were out there and had captured the body, so to speak, and were guarding it. And he said that a C-141 from Wright-Patterson was coming in to pick up the plane. Now that made me stand up because I didn't realize that Wright-Patterson had C-141s. I thought Military Airlift Command was the only one who owned C-141 aircraft. So I was like, my gosh, what's going on here? And he says, we want you to brief this at the, stand-up general briefing this morning and explain what happened to everybody. And I was like, you want me to tell General Tom Sadler and everybody in the command post that, we captured an alien? Because I wasn't sure I believed it. And they said, yes, we want you to brief that this morning. Well, I did some checking around, and I called the 38th Military Airlift Wing Command Post to check with them to see if, in other words, the story was the same that I was getting. And they said, yes, that they had heard that also. So it appears that, at least from what I was told, I didn't see the body or anything, that this actually did happen, that an alien was found on the base. And later that morning, I was told that they decided not to brief it in the stand-up briefing. And so I didn't actually brief it. Now, the only other thing that was interesting is that that morning I carried what's code word down to the General Sadler's office, and I noticed some commotion going on in there, and that some of the security police people were there in rather disheveled and so on. And that General Sadler was a stickler for everybody looking perfect, and it was kind of surprising to see these people that obviously needed shaves and were in fatigues and so on there. So then I knew that that might tie into the story that I had heard. Now, after the briefing, I also went to the photo lab. Almost every day I went to the photo lab because in your briefings you have, 4 screens and you have to keep them all, filled up with pretty pictures and so on. And there they indicated that they had taken pictures of something extraordinary. And I said, well, let me see them. And the sergeant was handing it to me, and his master sergeant says he can't see those. So all I know is that they had some pictures that I wasn't allowed to see. But normally, being the general's briefer, I had never been, stopped from seeing any pictures that they had previously. So those things tend to make me believe that something very important happened that night.
Was there a name for this group that came in from Wright-Patterson? Were they called anything particular?
They didn't give any name of who they were. They just said a C-141 is coming in to pick up the body.
Did they do so?
By knowledge, yes. Now everything was treated, as if this was true, and very a serious operation and so on. But I did not personally see, the alien body.
Right, no, I understand. Did you see the C-131 ever come in?
No, I didn't see the C-141
141.
personally. And so that's pretty much what happened that particular night.
What do you think the area where this ET was them there? Why do you think they were in the area?
I really don't know why they would be there. There is nuclear assets on the base that they used to carry weapons back and forth to Europe and so on. So that's a speculation. The area that there's actually shot in is an area where there's trucks and things, army trucks, which have, as I understand it, was an area that, you might say was fenced off. But these trucks were not particularly, secret or anything like that. They're just trucks, tank trucks, that kind of thing.
Did anybody describe to you the appearance of this?
Now, at a later time, I had done some checking around because I became interested. I talked to one of the security policemen who claims to have been out there. And he indicated that he essentially saw a small body that, could have been like a child, but it seemed to have a larger normal head. But even he, didn't get very close to examine it. And that's pretty much where the story has come from through him. Now, one interesting thing is many of the key personnel on the base at that time who had a connection to this, with this, were quickly transferred from the wing commander on down, indicating that if you knew something, they tended to split you up, so to speak, so you couldn't talk about it.
How soon after this event were they split up?
Oh, within a matter of weeks or whatever. Now, the security policeman told me that he was transferred within a few days. Matter of fact, he was taken to Wright-Patterson within the day or two and debriefed by a number of people and essentially told not to talk about it anymore. Now, his story to me was that, they heard this going on the radios, and they heard that this chase was on, that the alien had been shot at Fort Dix and they were chasing it towards McGuire. At least for whatever reason, it chose to run towards McGuire Air Force Base, and that both the state police and the military police were, you might say, chasing this person or alien, whoever it was. They came from what looked like a UFO. As I understand, it was a disc-shaped craft. Now, it was never, explained to me why they shot it. As a matter of fact, we didn't talk to that particular person who allegedly had shot it. And it apparently was, mortally wounded and ran towards McGuire.
Was there any, how long did the scene in the area, and how did that event take place? Were you able to piece together?
Well, they indicate, again, I didn't see the UFO.
No, I understand.
I had seen them on other occasions, but they indicated to me that the UFOs had been in the area for quite some time that evening, and that they had them on radar, and that the tower operator had seen them, and some of the other aircraft in the area had apparently seen them as well. Now, I had some confirmation on the story that I had talked to other air crews that had, sounds funny, but the information was put out over HF radio from the States, and they could pick it up in Europe, and they heard about it in Europe. And I've also heard other, just other people in the Air Force that have heard the story, like you might say many civilians have, because it's been published in various magazines and the like, claiming that they had heard the story, and pretty much always secondhand, like I have,
Yeah, but you were there in an official
Well,
capacity.
I was official there, in
Yeah.
official capacity, and
little
I was
different,
led to believe that it was, information that was truthful, and I was supposed to brief it to the general, but never did, actually.
So do you believe it actually happened?
I certainly believe that something happened. Whether that was the exact details, I don't know, but I do believe that something along that line definitely happened.
How many people would have been involved in guarding and securing the body and transporting it? Do you have any idea?
I got the impression there was like 6 or 8 people guarding the body, and then there was the commander of the security police unit, and then we were told, a few of us in the command post. So I assume that General Sadler was briefed about it.
Were you told, or have you figured out why this flight form was taken to Wright-Patterson?
Well, I mean, all the indications and all the stories are that that's pretty much the place where they take these bodies and craft and so on. I mean, those rumors have been going on at least when I was in the Air Force, and ever since then. Now, I don't think they still do take them to Wright-Patterson, but those are the stories that I heard when I was on active duty.
In the course of your career, I mean, you were 20 years in intelligence. What else had you heard in your military career about credible, either pilots or other people?
Well, I happened to meet a lady who claimed to have been out of White Sands and was an engineer working out there. And she was out hiking one day, and she told me that her and a couple of her friends had come up to the top of a hill, and they could look down in this valley, but only their heads were showing, on the top of the hill. They just happened to be looking over and down the way the path was. And they had seen a UFO on the ground with a couple of little aliens kind of like picking up rocks and stuff. And they watched it for an extensive period. It was, several hundred yards away from them. And they got a pretty good look at it. And eventually the aliens did see them. And they jumped in the craft and took off. Now that lady, I had chosen to believe her story, but I had personally never seen anything until about 1962. We were flying tankers over England, and London Control asked us to intercept a UFO. And we happened to be done with our refueling mission, and we accepted the assignment. We were on just over the North Sea, and they asked us to fly to the center of England, and we were doing, I don't know, some 400 miles an hour in a dive down to intercept this object. And they gave us headings, And it was pretty much hovering in the rough Stonehenge area, Oxford, Stonehenge area. And we got about, I'm not exactly sure, 20, 30 miles out, and I got it on radar. And it was a very large return. We used to fly up by the Firth of Forth Bridge, which is kind of like the San Francisco Bay Bridge, but it's a very large bridge. And the return was similar to that in size and in intensity. In other words, it was a very large radar return. And obviously London Control had it on their radar, and they were vectoring us to this object. And when we got about a mile from it, as a matter of fact, we were diving on the thing, and the whole aircraft was shaking. And it just took off into space at several thousand miles an hour, almost directly up. And now this was at night. It reminded me a lot of the shuttle launch, something going up very quickly at a high rate of speed. And frankly, at least to my knowledge, we had nothing like that capability. As a matter of fact, we said something about, have any kind of rocket launches from that area, and they said no, that we could just continue on our mission. So based on this lady's testimony and pretty much what we saw, I believe that there was something, going on out there.
What was the shape and size of this object that you saw over England?
I didn't, see a specific shape. It was mostly a bunch of series of lights. And it would only be just, my best guess is that it was a disc-type craft, but a fat disc. At least there was lights, something like this at the top and at the bottom. It was more than just a straight plate-like object. It had a dome on the top of it.
And sense of its size, 20 feet or?
No, I would say hundreds of feet. If the radar return was accurate, it was probably, just guessing, 500 yards long or something. I mean, a huge, huge thing.
Indication of its velocity as it went off?
No. Once we said it was gone, they were very, quiet. Didn't want to say anything to us. They just said, "Please return on your mission," and they gave us a heading, and there was no conversation. Something that bothered me a little bit, that they were very friendly as we're doing the intercept on the thing, and once the intercept was made and it had essentially, we chased it away, they didn't want to talk about it any further.
Now, was this air traffic control military or civilian?
It was civilian.
Civilian.
Well, London Control, as I understand it, is civilian, but it's, government. Yeah.
Follow-up or sequela to this in the sense of...
No. Well, we wrote it in the navigator's log, fairly detailed, but nobody came to brief us or anything like that, debrief us.
And have you had any other occasions where you've seen these objects or had an encounter with one of these objects?
Well, we're sitting on a lake here. I saw one in the lake here.
Really, this lake?
Yeah, 1980.
We'll talk about that for a moment.
Yeah, this is Briarwood Lake in Medford, New Jersey. And we had just moved into this house. In any case, we were asleep about, I was guessing, 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm asleep with my wife, and suddenly the room got very bright in the middle of the night. So I got up out of bed and opened up the shade, but most of the light was even coming through the shade. And looked outside, and I don't know if most people have seen a submarine surfacing with all the water coming off. Well, this was like a disc about 30 feet in diameter surfacing. And what looked to me like water coming off of it. But frequently I had flown the Atlantic and Pacific and so on, and seen the aurora borealis, or the northern lights, and around the craft were this ionization very similar to the aurora borealis. And it just kind of moved across the lake for a while and flew off at a fairly high rate of speed. Now, because of that, I've checked with a lot of the neighbors, and there's, I don't know the exact numbers, but there's like 40 or 50 lakes in Medford and Medford Lakes. And I frequently brought up the subject if they had seen anything. And it's amazing how many people have actually seen craft on the lakes.
How far away was this object when you saw it?
About 100 feet or so.
100 feet away from you?
Yeah, rather close by. I mean, in a sense.
Oh, that's very close.
But I couldn't see any, I could see that it looked like metal, but I couldn't see any, bolts or any kind of detail. It seemed to be all a particular surface that was very smooth and all connected together, no portholes or anything like that.
Did your wife or anyone else see it
No.
that night?
To my knowledge, no one else saw it. We've had other people in the family have similar sightings on, not this lake, but another lake we used to live on. And my son was a Boy Scout, for example. He had a sighting with several of his friends.
Have you had an occasion to, either in or since your military career, to involvement with this subject or sightings of this subject, radar confirmation of the subject?
Well, I'm the Eastern Director of MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, and people call me every other day or so. or send me emails almost every day telling about their particular sightings.
But I mean military and sort of official reconnaissance or military encounter. Years you were in the Air Force, did you run across other people who had
Well,
sightings?
occasionally I used to brief on the UFO sightings that had been occurred around the world to the generals. One that sticks out in my mind is 1976. There was a famous sighting in Tehran, Iran, where an F-4 or a couple F-4s chased a UFO. That kind of sighting I would brief on occasion to the generals, and they would be, more or less interested. Then someone would stop by and say, well, I had my sighting. We were flying 106s over Colorado or whatever, and we dove on the UFO sitting there. Very similar to my story, except I was in a four-engine tanker, and they were in a, two fighters, and they would dive on the thing. At that time, this particular colonel was telling me that the F-106 had set the world's record for speed, and they had these aircraft going as fast as they could, so to speak, diving on this UFO that was hovering in a valley in Colorado. And just like us, when they got near the craft, it took off and left them standing still, and they were doing like 1,500 or something, whatever the top speed was at that time for these aircraft in a dive. That these who is flying these have this capability that is far beyond anything we've had for years and years, I think even to today.
Well, what do you think these objects are? I mean, what do you think is going on? What are these things?
They may either be, belong to our Air Force. Now, I've never met anyone who claims to have, flown them or worked on them or anything. But I mean, sometimes there's advanced programs that you don't hear about. But it's more likely something alien, something, at least in my opinion, non-human. That has a different form of propulsion and is coming here and doing reconnaissance and taking minerals or whatever it is that they happen to be doing, cattle mutilations or whatever. A lot of it is speculation, of course, but there are things going on, and they are being seen. Talked to a number of astronauts who have seen them. Talked to other military pilots and the like who have seen them. And I remember Captain Ramage, who I used to work for in Athens, Greece, and he had one during the Korean War fly right off his wing, stay with him for like an hour, and do not only off his wing, but do acrobatic things around his aircraft. And I don't know the exact percentage of people, but probably 10% of the pilots and air crews that you ask about it have had sightings. One of the gentlemen who sat in this room here a few years ago, a colonel who was in intelligence, had his whole B-52 crew see it. Now, these people don't, I'd say, volunteer and sit in front of the camera and tell about it, but there's an awful lot of people who have seen them. They're not sure exactly what they are and what they're doing, but they know that they have advanced capability, and they usually see some kind of a, solid object that appears to be made of some kind of metal, usually a gunmetal gray. Usually particularly at night, people usually report various lights around them. There's a pretty much standard procedure, for the disc. Then there's other types that are seen as well, the cylinders and the triangles. And then, of course, just the lights in the sky. But we've found that often when these triangles or these lights get close to you, that you look inside the light, so to speak, and you can see an object with shape and what appears to be a craft of some kind.
Going back to the event at McGuire, are you aware of any particular handling of this body that took place, or did you hear of any precautions, biohazard or otherwise, that were taken?
It seems to me I was told that it was put in some kind of a, casket type thing, and taken away, so to speak, flown away. I didn't see that particular aircraft, and I don't know why, but that particular night I didn't try to get too nosy and go out and look at the end of the runway and so on. That they probably wouldn't have let me out there anyhow, no matter what was going on. So.
Anything else you want to share? Any other accounts that you've heard, or sightings or experiences that you think are significant?
Part of the reason I got, even though I had these sightings and these occurrences, I don't know, I wasn't exactly convinced that all this stuff was really happening. You hear about things, and even when you see things, you kind of question, did I see what I think I saw? But I was president of the Air Force Association in southern Jersey, and a lot of people would call the base and say, I have a UFO sighting and it's big or whatever. And the Air Force would generally say, well, we're not interested in Air Force in sightings of UFOs. Well, I was the president of the Air Force Association, and for whatever reason, people started hearing that I was interested, or at least, would listen to them, and the fact that I had Air Force in the name, people would start calling me. And I got a lot of, just people calling. I understand you know something about UFOs. I even had a general's wife call me. I had, PhDs, in some cases, doctors calling me who had strange things happening to him. They, had missing time, that kind of thing. And it happened that my daughter was going to Temple University at the same time and took a course from a Dr. David Jacobs. And in any case, all these things started adding up, and I became more interested and started studying it. And when I retired from Vice President of MedCorps, I decided to get into this pretty much full time to see what was really going on. And what's amazed me is every week, I'll get a call, or people will be on the back of cruise ships, and they'll look, out there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and right behind the cruise ship there'll be sitting a UFO, or an architect will call and draw you a beautiful architectural drawing of the UFO that he just saw flying over. And we take this architectural drawing and match it against photographs that people have. And it'll be exactly the same craft, one made by an architectural drawing, one photographed in Mexico, 5 years ago. Well, obviously these two people have no knowledge of each other, but there's the same craft. In many cases, the same ones are photographed, they're videotaped. And I've met people from other military, French and Greek and German and British particularly, who have seen these things. In Chile, as far as that goes. I don't know why, but certain countries have a much more open attitude towards this, particularly Chile, Brazil, South American countries. There it is. What can we do about it?
Well, that's a good question. Why do you think that the reality of this is still denied in the United States?
Well, I think that in 1947 or in that time frame, something crashed out west. You know, whether it was Roswell, the specific Roswell that's been written about, but I think something happened out there, at least based on, you know, I might say the talk in the military that something crashed sometime out there. And probably President Truman was in office, and at that time, General Eisenhower was the head of the Army. And when this information came in, they weren't sure what was going on, whether it was Russian or some kind of invasion or whatever. Well, the tendency is to make things classified when you don't know what's happening. You know, secret, top secret, or whatever. And if it comes down from the president, it's a very high classification, probably code word above top secret. In other words, need to know, that kind of thing. And once that caveat or designation is put on something, it's very difficult to get it downgraded. I mean, you can go to the archives, and despite what they tell you, they have things going back to the Second World War that you still are not allowed to look at. And once these things are top secret or whatever, it's difficult to get it down. It just kind of moves on and forever stays top secret or whatever until some president or head of the Army or Joint Chiefs of Staff or whatever decides that it's okay to downgrade it. But when there's a doubt, they tend not to downgrade. They just keep it very classified and very secret, basing it on, you can base it on the fact, for example, that let's say this craft had advanced technological capabilities. So you don't want the other side, so to speak, to know what you know and how these things work and the like. It's to your advantage to keep this secret.
What you want to share?
No, I think that it's time that these various programs come out. Now, one of the things that I've found is that the way it's been kept secret to a big extent is the fact of through ridicule. If it always had been just top secret, I think most of the world would know about it tonight. But they put in a kind of a ridicule factor, which made people, you'll hear somebody telling a story like this, they'll say, well, he must be crazy that he believes in UFOs. And they brought this out. When anyone saw anything, you know, there'd be two people, we'll say one has funny hair and looks wild and so on, and the guy standing next to him is a police officer. Well, they always interviewed the wild guy and never put the police officer on the screen. My experience has been an awful lot of policemen have seen these, an awful lot of FBI have seen these, an awful lot of military has seen it, and he might have like at times I used to carry nuclear weapons. In other words, I was mentally fit to carry nuclear weapons, but I'm not mentally fit if I see a UFO. Well, this criticism and this ridicule is, I think, done more to keep the story coming out than almost anything else.
I would agree with that. Very good. Thank you very much.
I've got one that I didn't share with you.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, this was in 1957. I was in Detroit, and I was.
We probably need to put the wire on.
Yeah, better. Yeah. I was a test pilot and an engineering officer for the Bureau of Aeronautics. We're just moving into a new home. My son was about 8 years old, and we were sodding the backyard. And I went into the house to wash up, and he came into the house and says, Dad, Mommy wants you outside. I says, what for? He says, we're looking at flying saucers. Well, I thought to myself, what the heck does he know about flying saucers? So I go outside, and here she is standing and pointing to something up above us. And you know what it was? It was a small mothership about the size of the Dembski ship, and there were small craft all around it. So I go back in the house and get the binoculars because I want to get a good look at this. So I come back, and the ship itself is gone, but I got a chance to see 2 or 3 of the small ones. And they were identical with the little 3 balls underneath, condensers or what have you, to the Georgia Dembski craft. So, you know, when we got back in the house, I asked my wife, I said, how did you find out about flying saucers? Because we were not supposed to tell her, even our wives, in our encounter, which was in 51. She said, now, she was explaining to him how they launch them and retrieve them. The bottom and the top. She was explaining this process. And she said, I read your book by Georgia Dembski, Inside Spaceships. I said, you bought that book. I said, do you believe that he was telling the truth? They told me he was crazy. And she says, well, didn't you? You just saw it out there. So now what do you do? So that's when our discussion began. And, of course, she was the one that found out through other wives about our encounter, and she became interested, and she bought the Georgia Dembski book, Inside Spaceships. And to be honest with you, I didn't read it because at that point in time, I really didn't have that much interest in it. So now my son, you know, still to this day remembers it very well, but in his job, he wouldn't tell anybody anything. Like he was 8 years old, and he was laying down on the grass, and I just put down and looking up, and this was, and it wasn't but about 2,000 or 3,000 feet up, directly above our house. It was that close. That's why it was really.
What year was this?
1957. Now this is the year that Sputnik went up. This is the year where a lot of other things happened in 1957, and then I'll have another one I might as well share with you. I don't know what it was, 94, 96, 94 I guess it was. We had a Dolphin Quest cruise. I don't know if you ever heard of Drumelo Melchizedek or not. And some of these people, we went to Bermuda to bring the dolphins back. Supposedly the dolphins hadn't been there for 17 years or this type of thing. And also we did one for the Earth. I used to fly in and out of Bermuda, but I didn't know there were any crystal caves in Bermuda, but we went on the crystal cave to do the one for the Earth, and supposedly it was probably one of the old tunnels where I'd go into Atlantis. And then we did the ceremony for the dolphins in the most beautiful cove I've ever seen in my life. I mean, the water was about up to here, and big rocks all around it, and the entrance to the ocean was only about 3 feet out there, the big waves hitting. And so later on, I asked Drumelo, I said, you know, to be honest with you, I don't know why I came on this trip. I've enjoyed it so far. He said, well, I'll be honest with you, I don't know why I did either. You know, Drumelo is supposed to be from Sirius, and that's the planet where the dolphins supposedly come and go. And when we were about, so that night, we had all of our presentations were over with, and Gregory Potsman, I guess his name, he lives down in North Carolina now. They bought 85 acres down not too far. Well, anyway, he asked me if I would give a presentation on these pictures that I sent you and tell them a little bit about it. So I said, sure. So they got a room. I guess there's probably about 60 of us or what have you. So I did a presentation, passed the pictures around and this type of thing. And, of course, we were not too far out of New York, about, I guess, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. We were supposed to dock around 6. And, of course, we had to get our baggage out in the hallway, and I was exhausted. And at about 2 o'clock in the morning, they were beating on my door, and I went to the door, and they said, you got to come up here, bring your cameras. So we're looking at flying saucers. Well, I said, look, this one is for you. I want to get some sleep. So I went back to sleep. So naturally, I was really interested in what the heck they did see and really what happened. And I guess they were much younger than me, and they don't stay out too late at night. So I guess about 3 months after this, they were going to have a reunion in Staten Island, so I decided to go to it for one reason, to really find out what they did see. So the way they explained it to me is that they were sitting at the bar, you know, and having what have you, a few drinks, and somebody came in and said, you ought to go outside. Somebody's putting on a show for us, the lights. So they all go out there, and they said it's lasted for over 40 minutes because they said at the time that they came down to get me, it's only been 10, 15 minutes, and they went back up and watched it again. And they said it was a ship that was much bigger than this cruise ship. Was probably about 800 feet long, this ship that we were on. And it was right over their head, and it was launching smaller craft that had lights all over them, and they were doing all kind of light shows for them. Now, this is 100 and some miles outside of New York. Now, with the thousands of people who are on that ship, you would think it's something would have hit the newspaper. You know, it'd be something that would be published about this, but nothing was said anywhere. But these people, the type of people they were not the type that are going to tell you they saw something if they didn't. So these things have constantly happened to me over time. But the one in Detroit was amazing. This is where, you've ever heard of George Hunt Williamson? Or you ever heard of Richard Miller, any of those? They used to go out there a lot. And this is where it happened. So that's about all I can share.
Good. Thank you. Very good. Rich Filer in the Air Force.